for 43 years. I believed family meant everything. I raised my children with love. I wrote checks when they struggled. After my husband Harold died, I kept giving because that's what mothers do. Then came my granddaughter's wedding reception. My son Clayton stood at the microphone and called me the family's insurance policy. 200 people laughed while I stood frozen in disbelief. Stay with me and comment your city so I can see where this story reaches. That night, I learned something that changed everything. Harold had seen this coming. He had prepared a secret weapon and left it waiting for me. But let me start from the beginning. I truly appreciate you being here with me. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Has anyone in your family ever made you feel invisible or taken for granted? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments. Your presence here means more than you know. Just a note, some details are fictionalized to highlight the lesson. What matters is the message. The words, "our family's insurance policy," echoed through the Hermitage Hotel ballroom, and 200 guests laughed, while I felt my heart stop. My son Clayton stood at the microphone, champagne raised, his 47-year-old face flushed with the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no. His insurance supervisor's salary couldn't pay for the Italian suit he was wearing, but he wore it like he'd earned every thread. "To my mother," he continued, voice amplified across the gilded room, "the woman who makes all our dreams affordable." More laughter. Glasses clinked. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across faces I had known for decades, and every single one of them was smiling. Have you ever had a moment where the air itself seemed to crystallize around you, where sound arrives a half-second delayed, as if reality needs time to confirm what just happened? I am Vivian Mercer, 67 years old, widow of Harold Mercer, who built a $22 million estate through 40 years of honest work. And standing in that ballroom in the sage green dress Harold had always adored, I understood for the first time that my family saw me as nothing more than a checkbook with a heartbeat. My granddaughter Sloane sat at the head table, 25 and radiant in ivory lace, her new husband's hand clasped in hers. She was the reason we were all here. Her wedding day. The day I had anticipated for months, had funded entirely, had wept over while addressing invitations, because Harold should have been here to see it. Sloane's smile faltered, almost imperceptibly, as Clayton continued his toast. She glanced at me, then away. Where would any of us be without Grandma's generous contributions? Clayton winked at the crowd. Someone near the bar shouted, "Hear, hear!" and the laughter swelled again. I gripped my champagne glass tighter. The bubbles had gone still. That morning, I had stood in front of my bedroom mirror feeling something close to joy. October light streamed through the lace curtains of the Victorian estate Harold and I had restored together, and I'd spoken to his photograph the way I always did. "You'd be so proud of her today, Harold." He smiled back at me from the silver frame on my nightstand. 69 when cancer took him 2 years ago. Still handsome. Still watching over me with those steady eyes that had never once made me feel like a burden. "I wish you were here to walk her down that aisle with me," I'd whispered. I had dabbed on the perfume he gave me for our 40th anniversary. I had chosen the sage dress because he said it made my eyes look like sea glass. I had believed, standing in that soft morning light, that today would be a celebration of family, of continuity, of love passing from one generation to the next. That morning, I had no idea those would be among the last peaceful hours I'd know for months. The ballroom snapped back into focus. Clayton was still talking, but I had stopped hearing the words. Instead, I was watching faces. The way our neighbor, Dr. Whitfield, glanced at his wife with raised eyebrows. The way Sloane's new in-laws exchanged looks that carried the weight of confirmed suspicion. The way my own family nodded along as if Clayton were stating obvious truth rather than eviscerating me in public. Seriously, though, we love you, Mom. Clayton raised his glass higher. To the woman who keeps the Mercer legacy alive. To Vivian, the crowd echoed. And 200 people drank to my generosity, while I stood frozen in sage green silk. Denise, my daughter-in-law, sat beside Clayton's empty chair, 45 years old, draped in champagne silk that cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She had never liked me. I had always known that, but I had attributed it to the ordinary friction between mothers and the women who marry their sons. How long had they been laughing at me behind closed doors? Denise caught me looking, and in that moment, her face did something I will never forget. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't surprised at all. She had known exactly what Clayton would say. The slight lift of her chin, the satisfied narrowing of her eyes. This wasn't a wife embarrassed by her husband's tactless humor. This was a woman watching a plan unfold precisely as designed. They all had. They had all known. The champagne in my glass trembled. I looked down at my hand and watched it shake. This hand that had signed checks for private schools and down payments and business loans and wedding venues. This hand that had never once demanded acknowledgement because I believed family didn't keep score. Sloane wouldn't meet my eyes now. Her new husband whispered something in her ear, and she nodded, still staring at her plate. The roses and lilies perfuming the ballroom suddenly smelled cloying, funereal. The champagne I'd been sipping tasted like metal, and the sage dress Harold loved felt like a costume I'd worn to my own humiliation. I understood with terrible clarity that this wasn't a joke. It wasn't a slip of the tongue from a son who'd had too much to drink. It was a declaration, a public announcement of how the Mercer family viewed the woman who had given them everything. The band began to play. Guests returned to their conversations. Life moved on as if nothing had happened. But across the ballroom, I saw someone watching me with a different expression entirely. Warren Thornton, Harold's oldest friend, was making his way toward me through the crowd. The applause had faded, but the laughter still echoed in my skull like a church bell tolling for something dead. Warren Thornton reached me before I could escape. Harold's oldest friend, 66 and distinguished in his tailored charcoal suit, appeared at my elbow with the quiet urgency of a man who had been waiting for the right moment. His eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Concern, certainly, but also something sharper. Purpose. "Vivian," he said, his voice low. "Not here. Give me a moment." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched him step back into the crowd. Whatever he wanted to tell me would have to wait. Right now. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to stop seeing Clayton's self-satisfied grin every time I closed my eyes. I moved toward the bar, keeping my spine straight, my face composed. Decades of hosting charity galas and board dinners had taught me how to perform dignity, even when I felt none. But as I passed a cluster of women near the ice sculpture, fragments of conversation stopped me cold. Did you hear what Denise called her last night?" A woman in burgundy pressed her hand to her chest, delighted. "The family ATM! Right there at the rehearsal dinner," her companion snorted. "Pamela said they couldn't believe she fell for the Maldives pitch last year. Apparently, Clayton told everyone at Thanksgiving it was like taking candy from a baby." How many dinner parties had they laughed about me when I wasn't in the room? How many holidays had I smiled through, convinced I was surrounded by love, while jokes circulated behind my back? The women noticed me standing there. Their laughter died. One had the grace to look mortified. The other simply turned away, champagne flute raised like a shield. I kept walking. The taste in my mouth had turned to copper. The Maldives trip, last February. Clayton had called me, voice trembling with what I now recognized as performance. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him and Denise. A healing retreat after their miscarriage scare. $32,000. And I had written the check within the hour because that's what mothers do when their children are hurting. There had been no miscarriage scare. I understood that now with the clarity of a woman whose blindfold had been ripped away. Clayton intercepted me near the terrace doors. "Mom!" He draped his arm around my shoulders, steering me toward a group of people I vaguely recognized from his office. "Come meet the Whitfields. Bill's been wanting to talk about that investment opportunity I mentioned." "Clayton," I kept my voice steady. "That toast, what you said." "Mom, don't be so sensitive." He rolled his eyes with the casual cruelty of a teenager, not a 47-year-old man. "It was a compliment. Everyone knows you're the generous one. Lighten up. It's a party." Let me tell you something about the word sensitive. It's the weapon people use when they don't want to take responsibility for cruelty. When someone tells you that you're being too sensitive, what they really mean is that your pain is inconvenient for them. "Bill! Martha!" Clayton pulled me toward a silver-haired couple, his grip tightening on my arm. "Meet Mom, our biggest supporter." "In every sense," Bill Whitfield chuckled. Martha offered a sympathetic smile that told me she had heard the toast and understood exactly what it meant. I excused myself with practiced grace. My face felt like a mask that might crack if I held it too long. The restroom. I needed the restroom. 3 minutes alone. Cold water on my wrists. I didn't make it. Warren stepped into my path just outside the ballroom, where the hallway was quiet and the noise from the reception became a muffled roar. His expression was grave, and in it I saw something I hadn't seen all evening. Respect. "Mrs. Mercer Vivian." He glanced back toward the ballroom. I couldn't help noticing the toast and some of the comments afterward. "Warren, I don't—" "Please." He held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've known you and Harold for 40 years. He was my law partner before he retired. My friend. And there are things he told me, in confidence, that I've waited to share until the time was right." For the first time since the toast, something other than shame stirred in my chest. It felt almost like hope, though I was afraid to name it. Harold anticipated moments exactly like this. Warren pressed something into my palm, a business card, cream-colored, his name embossed in simple black letters. He prepared something, legal documents, instructions. He asked me to watch over you and to act when necessary. "What kind of documents?" "Call me Monday." His eyes held mine. "There are things you need to know. Things Harold wanted you to know only if his fears prove justified." He patted my hand once, gently. then disappeared back into the crowd. Warren's card felt impossibly heavy in my palm. Harold had been gone for 2 years, yet somehow he was still protecting me. I didn't know what he'd prepared, but as I watched Clayton laugh with his business associates across the ballroom, his arm around Denise, their heads tilted together in shared amusement, I understood one thing with absolute certainty. My husband had seen what I had refused to see, and he had made plans. The name tag from the reception sat on my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene, though I hadn't realized until now that I was the victim. Monday felt impossibly far away. Warren's card lay beside my untouched coffee, cream-colored against the dark wood, promising answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Clayton's voice, our family's insurance policy, the laughter, the sound of 200 people raising their glasses to my generosity while my son reduced me to a line item. The Victorian estate was silent around me. Harold and I had filled this house with life for 40 years. Dinner parties and holiday gatherings, children's birthdays, and grandchildren's first steps. Now the silence felt accusatory. The family portrait above the fireplace, taken 5 years ago for our 40th anniversary, showed everyone smiling. Clayton and Denise on the left, Drew on the right, Sloane kneeling in front with her gap-toothed 14-year-old grin. Ola's hand rested on my shoulder. We looked happy. We looked like family. Grief, I've learned, is a kind of blindness. It doesn't just obscure the future. It rewrites the past. Every memory becomes filtered through loss, softened, sanctified. The flaws disappear. The warning signs vanish. You remember what you need to remember to survive. When exactly had things changed? Or had they always been this way, and I had simply refused to see it? I rose from the kitchen table, pulling my bathrobe tighter against the morning chill, and walked to Harold's study. 2 years since his death, and I still hadn't changed anything. His books lined the shelves, law volumes, biographies, the mystery novels he read for pleasure. His reading glasses sat on the desk where he'd left them the last time he was strong enough to work. The leather chair still held the impression of his body. I ran my fingers along the desk's edge, and suddenly I was back in this room, 6 months after his diagnosis. Harold had called me in with unusual urgency. His face was thinner then, the cancer already claiming territory, but his eyes were sharp. Clayton sees money as the solution to everything, he had said. Money without values just creates more problems. I had dismissed it. Harold was tired, I told myself. The medication was affecting his mood. Clayton wasn't perfect, but he was our son. Promise me you'll protect yourself. Vivian. Harold had gripped my hand with surprising strength, not just financially. Have you ever had someone you love try to tell you something you weren't ready to hear? You nod. You agree. You promise to remember. And then you tuck it away in some mental drawer labeled "Things Too Painful to Examine," and you never open that drawer again. I hadn't understood then, or perhaps I hadn't wanted to understand. The study felt colder now. I moved to my own desk, the small antique secretary, where I handled household correspondence and bills. The drawer stuck slightly. I hadn't opened it in months. Inside, a stack of bank statements I'd been meaning to organize sat in their unopened envelopes. The accountant handled the major finances, but these were my personal accounts, the ones I used for family gifts and contributions. I began sorting. January through October, 2 years' worth of statements. The numbers blurred together at first. Routine expenses, charitable donations, household costs. But then I started circling the larger withdrawals. $30,000 for Clayton's kitchen renovation. $45,000 for Drew's gallery equipment, a loan he'd never mentioned repaying. $12,000 for Sloane's study abroad semester. $22,000 when Denise's sister needed emergency surgery and their insurance wouldn't cover the experimental procedure. When had helping become expected? I kept counting. The numbers mounted with sickening speed. A car for Clayton's commute when his old one died. Jennifer's private school tuition when Drew and his wife decided public school wasn't good enough. Emergency cash when someone's credit card was stolen, or a pipe burst, or an opportunity couldn't wait. The first large check was dated 3 weeks after Harold's diagnosis. I stared at the statement, the coffee in my stomach turning to acid. Clayton had come to me asking for help with a business investment. Just a short-term loan, he'd said. Harold was in the hospital for his first round of chemotherapy, and I had been so frightened, so desperate for any distraction from the terror of losing my husband, that I'd written the check without a second thought. $25,000. Never repaid. Never mentioned again. The exploitation hadn't started after Harold died. It had started while he was dying, when I was too grief-stricken to notice. They had watched me crumble and seen opportunity. I kept flipping through statements, my hands trembling now. And then I found it. A $50,000 check to Clayton, dated while Harold was still in hospice. The final weeks, when I had slept on a cot beside his bed, when I had barely eaten, when my entire world had narrowed to the sound of his breathing and the terror of silence. I had no memory of writing it, none. But there was my signature, shaky but unmistakable. The memo line was blank. A sticky note was still attached to the statement. The adhesive yellowed with age. The handwriting wasn't mine. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. I almost didn't go to the brunch. The sticky note with Clayton's handwriting still sat on my desk. That casual, "Thanks, Mom," beside a check I couldn't remember writing. But something Harold used to say kept echoing in my mind. The only way to know who someone really is to watch them when they think they've already won. So I put on my cream pantsuit. I drove to Belmead Country Club, and I walked into that private dining room with my spine straight and my eyes open for the first time in years. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know. I had been placed at a table near the window with distant acquaintances, the Burkes, who I'd met perhaps twice at charity functions, while Clayton and Denise held court at the center table with Sloane and her new husband. The message was clear. I was a funding source, not a grandmother. Walking into that dining room felt like entering a play where everyone knew their lines except me, and I had been cast as the prop. "Mom!" Clayton waved me over with that performative warmth I was beginning to recognize. "Over here! We saved you a seat." Denise smiled her champagne silk smile. "Vivian, you look nice. We want everyone to know who made this weekend possible." Sloane sat beside her new husband, Drew Holloway, 27, with earnest brown eyes, looking both elated and slightly overwhelmed by the Mercer family dynamics. He had married into something he didn't fully understand yet. I wondered if Sloane had warned him, or if she even knew herself what kind of family this had become. I took my seat. The coffee was lukewarm, The mimosas flowed, and I watched. The room buzzed with post-wedding chatter, compliments on the ceremony, discussions of honeymoon destinations. I smiled when spoken to and offered nothing more. 20 minutes passed in careful observation. Then Denise clinked her glass. "Everyone, if I could have your attention." She rose, champagne flute raised, her voice carrying across the white tablecloths and fresh flower arrangements. "I just want to take a moment to thank some special people." The room quieted. Forks paused midair. First, of course, to the beautiful newlyweds. Polite applause. And to my wonderful husband, who gave such a memorable toast last night. Clayton inclined his head with false modesty. But most importantly, Denise continued, her eyes finding mine across the room, a special thank you to Grandma Vivian, who's generously funding Sloan and Drew's dream honeymoon to the Maldives. Have you ever watched someone announce what you'll do with your own money, while a room full of strangers applauds your supposed generosity? The clapping washed over me like cold water. Faces turned toward me, smiling, expecting gratitude. Sloan beamed. Drew raised his juice glass in my direction, and I sat frozen, because this was the first I was hearing that any decision had been made. We had discussed it. Once. Denise had called the morning after the wedding, while I was still staring at bank statements, and mentioned that Sloan had her heart set on a destination honeymoon. I had said I would think about it, nothing more. Thinking about it, apparently, had been translated into committed funding. Clayton leaned toward me, his smile fixed, but his voice low. "Just smile, Mom. We discussed this." "No," I said quietly. "You discussed it." I listened. His eyes flickered. Warning. The applause faded. People returned to their conversations. But something inside me, something that had been bending for 3 years, finally refused to bend any further. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. The small click of porcelain on porcelain seemed unnaturally loud. "I'm sorry," I said, and my voice carried further than I intended, perhaps further than I knew it could. "But this is the first I'm hearing of it. I haven't agreed to fund a honeymoon." Silence. Not the comfortable silence of a room pausing between topics. The sharp, breathless silence of something breaking. Denise's smile froze. "We discussed it yesterday. You said you'd think about it." "Yes," I met her eyes. "And I'm still thinking." Sloane's face shifted from joy to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. She glanced at her father, seeking guidance. Drew stared at his plate as if hoping it might offer escape. Clayton's expression underwent a transformation I had never witnessed before. The mask of the devoted son, the charming host, the grateful beneficiary. It fell away, piece by piece. What remained was cold, calculating, and utterly unfamiliar. The room watched. The Burkes, the Whitfields, Denise's sister, who I had helped with surgical bills just 6 months ago. All of them witnessed the moment the Mercer matriarch stopped playing her assigned role. "Mom," Clayton's voice was pleasant, but his jaw was tight. "Can I speak with you privately?" "I believe you just spoke quite publicly on my behalf," I replied. "Perhaps that's enough speaking for one morning." I gathered my purse, rose from my chair. The cream pantsuit felt like armor now, not costume. Clayton caught my arm as I passed. His grip was firm, not painful, but insistent. He leaned close, his smile intact for anyone watching. But his voice was ice. "You're going to regret this, Mom." The words barely carried beyond my ear. "I promise you that." I removed my arm from his grasp. "Perhaps," I said, "but not as much as you're going to regret underestimating me." I walked out of that dining room into the club lobby, my heart pounding, my hands steady. And there, waiting by the entrance, as if he had known exactly when I would need him, stood Warren Thornton. What do you do when the person who promised to make you regret something is your own son, and you're not sure if he's bluffing? I stood in the country club lobby, my car keys digging into my palm, my heart still racing from the confrontation. Through the distant doorway, I could hear the clink of glasses resuming, conversation flowing back into the void my exit had created, life moving on, the performance continuing without me. Warren Thornton appeared at my elbow, as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Perhaps he had. "I couldn't help witnessing what just happened," he said, his voice low. "I'm not surprised, but I am sorry." I turned to face him. His expression held none of the shock I might have expected from a casual observer. Instead, there was something almost like satisfaction beneath his concern. "You were watching," I said. It wasn't a question. I was documenting. He guided me gently toward a quiet alcove near the tall windows, away from the lobby traffic. Since the wedding reception, Harold asked me to. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the strange, terrible freedom of having finally said no. 3 years of compliance, of accommodation, of writing checks and asking no questions. And now, in the space of one sentence, I had broken something that couldn't be unbroken. "What do you mean, documenting?" I steadied myself against a marble pillar. "Warren, what is going on?" He glanced toward the dining room, then back to me. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately? Not here." "My home, Harold's study. I'll follow you." The drive back to the Victorian estate took 20 minutes. I don't remember a single turn. My mind kept circling the same questions. What had Harold known? What had he prepared? And why hadn't he told me? Warren's sedan pulled into the driveway behind mine. I led him through the house without speaking, past the family portrait that now felt like a lie, into the study where Harold's reading glasses still sat on the desk. Warren settled into the leather chair across from Harold's empty one. I remained standing. "Tell me everything." He nodded slowly. 6 months before Harold passed, he came to me with concerns. He'd noticed patterns, requests for money that didn't quite add up, stories that contradicted each other. He didn't want to burden you with suspicions while he was fighting for his life, but he wanted to protect you. How long had Harold known what I'd refused to see? How many nights had he lain awake in that hospital bed, worrying not about his own death, but about what would happen to me after? "He added a codicil to his will," Warren continued. "An amendment filed privately. I'm the only executor who knows its full contents." "A codicil," I repeated. The word felt foreign on my tongue. "It contains what's called a dignity clause. Any descendant child, grandchild, spouse of either, who publicly humiliates you, manipulates you financially, or treats you with documented disrespect, automatically forfeits their share of the estate." I sank into Harold's chair. The leather still smelled faintly of him, old books and cedar, and the particular warmth of a man who had loved me for 43 years. "The toast at the wedding," I said slowly. "Denise's announcement today. Clayton's threat. All documented, all witnessed, all grounds for forfeiture." Warren's voice was gentle but precise. "They've already triggered the clause. Vivian, They just don't know it yet. It was as if Harold had reached through death itself to place a shield around me, one I never knew existed until I needed it. Why didn't he tell me? The question emerged as a whisper. Warren was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 40 years of friendship. He hoped it would never be needed. He wanted them to treat you well because they loved you, not because they feared losing money. He paused. He believed in the best of them, right until the end. But he planned for the worst. I thought of Harold in his final weeks, the way he held my hand, the way he looked at me as if memorizing my face. I had thought he was saying goodbye. Perhaps he had also been making promises. What happens now? That depends on you. Warren leaned forward. The codicil gives you options, not obligations. You can invoke it immediately. You can wait and gather more evidence, or you can choose not to invoke it at all. He met my eyes. Harold wanted you to have power, Vivian, the power to decide. Power. Such a strange word to apply to myself. For 3 years, I had felt powerless, drowning in grief, buffeted by demands, grateful for any scrap of family connection. And all along, Harold had been building me an ark. Warren reached into his jacket and pressed his business card into my palm again. But this time, the weight of it felt different. "There's more," he said quietly. "The estate is considerably larger than your family believes." Harold was very private about certain investments. I looked up. "I think you should sit down before I tell you the actual number." He paused, seeing that I was already sitting. "The estate isn't $22 million. Vivian, it's closer to 31, and your family has no idea." I spread 3 years of bank statements across my dining room table like a detective laying out evidence at a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it was. Warren had left an hour ago, after explaining the hidden investments Harold had tucked away. $9 million my family didn't know existed. $9 million of breathing room. But the revelation that haunted me wasn't the money Harold had protected. It was the money I had given away. I pulled storage boxes from the hall closet, hauling files I hadn't touched since Harold's death. Bank statements, credit card records, the checkbook register I'd kept in my neat handwriting, noting every expenditure. I created columns on a legal pad. Date, amount, recipient, stated purpose. The first year after Harold died, I had been too grief-stricken to notice patterns. A check here for Sloane's graduation car, a wire transfer there for Clayton's kitchen renovation, emergency funds when someone's credit card was compromised, contributor vacations I was never invited to join. Let me tell you something about generosity when it's expected rather than appreciated. It stops being a gift and becomes a tax. And I had been paying that tax for 3 years without questioning why. The dining room filled with paper. I sorted by category: home improvements, vehicles, education, travel, medical, miscellaneous, emergencies. The miscellaneous column grew longest. $20,000 for Clayton's business venture that never materialized. $15,000 when Denise's investment club needed capital. $20,000 for the anniversary trip to Cabo, a celebration I learned about through Instagram photos after they returned. When was the last time I had taken a trip? When was the last time anyone had asked if I wanted to come along? I fed numbers into my calculator. The running total climbed with sickening speed. Tens of thousands became hundreds of thousands. My coffee went cold beside me. The afternoon light shifted across the table. illuminating receipts and statements like artifacts from an archaeological dig into my own exploitation. $380,000. I had to count the zeros twice. Nearly $127,000 per year, more than most people earn in a decade, flowing out of my accounts into Clayton and Denise's hands. And that didn't include the wedding I had just funded. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the honeymoon suite, the rehearsal dinner. Another $40,000, at least. I set down the calculator and stared at the wall. The family portrait hung there, everyone smiling. I had paid for that photo session, too. The phone rang. Denise's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it ring 3 times before answering, using those seconds to compose myself. Vivian, her voice dripped honey. I'm so glad I caught you. I wanted to clear the air after that little misunderstanding at brunch. Misunderstanding, I repeated. You know how Clayton gets. He was just surprised, that's all. We all were. A practiced laugh. I'm sure once you've had time to think, you'll see how much this honeymoon means to Sloan. How do you explain to someone that the word no isn't a negotiation? It's a complete sentence. Sloan is absolutely heartbroken, Denise continued when I didn't respond. She's been crying all morning. You know she's always looked up to you. Vivian, she was telling Drew just last night how much your support means to her. The Maldives booking expires tomorrow. There it was, the deadline, the pressure, the weaponization of my granddaughter's emotions against me. I'll think about it, I said. Of course you will. I knew you'd come around. Family is everything, isn't it? We all just want what's best for Sloan. I said I'll think about it, not that I've decided. Silence on the line. Then, with a slightly harder edge beneath the sweetness, well, we'll talk soon then. Give you time to reflect on what really matters. I hung up without saying goodbye. The phone sat in my hand, warm from the call. I looked down at the spreadsheet I'd created, the neat columns of numbers that told the story of my systematic diminishment. But something else caught my eye, a pattern I'd missed the first time through. I pulled the statements closer, checking dates against my calendar. The car for Sloan had been requested 2 weeks after Mother's Day brunch, where Clayton had made a toast to my generosity. The kitchen renovation funds came 10 days after my birthday dinner, where Denise had given a speech about what a wonderful mother-in-law I was. The Cabo trip money followed Christmas by exactly 12 days. Christmas, where they'd presented me with a photo album titled Our Family's Heart. Every major request had come within 2 weeks of a family gathering where I'd been publicly thanked. They weren't just taking my money. They were manufacturing gratitude to justify the next withdrawal. Praise me at Thanksgiving. Ask for $30,000 by December 10th. Celebrate me at Easter. Request emergency funds by May. The timeline was almost mathematical in its precision. I had thought I was being loved. I had thought the toasts and the albums and the speeches were genuine expressions of family affection. They were invoices, prepayment for debts they planned to call in. The doorbell rang. I rose slowly, my joints stiff from hours hunched over paperwork. Through the leaded glass of the front door, I could see a figure I hadn't expected. Tate Mercer, my youngest grandson, stood on my porch with an expression I had never seen him wear before: fear. I opened the door to find my youngest grandson standing on the porch, his face pale beneath the October afternoon light. Tate Mercer was 23, with his grandfather's kind eyes and the quiet integrity Harold had always recognized in him. He worked as a junior architect at a small firm downtown, the only one of my grandchildren who had chosen a creative path over business. And right now, he looked like he was about to be sick. "Grandma." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me so tightly I felt my ribs compress. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something at the wedding, at the brunch. I didn't know what to do." I held him. This boy who had sat on Harold's lap learning to play chess. This young man who had delivered the eulogy at his grandfather's funeral, with tears streaming down his face and not a trace of staff. Embarrassment. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." In that moment, with my grandson's arms around me, I felt less alone than I had in 2 years. I led him inside, stepping over the coffee I had spilled across the entryway. The dining room table was still covered with bank statements and my damning spreadsheet. But Tate barely glanced at it. Whatever had brought him here, it consumed his attention completely. I put the kettle on. Some conversations require tea. "There's something you need to know," Tate said, settling onto a kitchen stool. His knee bounced with nervous energy. "Something I overheard. Mom and Dad don't know I was listening." I set 2 cups on the counter and waited. "Last night, after the brunch, they thought I'd gone to bed. I came down to get water, and I heard them in the study." He swallowed hard. "Dad was talking about how your behavior was concerning, how a woman your age shouldn't be living alone in such a big house." "My behavior," I repeated. "You mean saying no to funding a vacation I wasn't consulted about?" He called it erratic. Tate's voice cracked. "He said it was time to have a serious conversation about your future." Mom was on her laptop. I saw what she was looking at. The kettle whistled. I poured water over tea bags, my hands steady through sheer force of will. What was she looking at? Sunrise Meadows Retirement Community. Tate met my eyes. And real estate listings. She had a browser tab open showing recent sales in this neighborhood. They weren't just planning to take my money. They were planning to take my home, the house Harold and I had restored together, where we had raised our children, where I had held his hand in our bedroom while cancer stole him from me, one day at a time. Dad said the market is hot right now, that they could get $2.5 million, maybe more. Tate's voice dropped. He said it would be better for everyone if you downsized, that at your age you'd be safer with professional care. I set down the teapot. The afternoon light fell across my kitchen, the kitchen where I had baked birthday cakes and hosted Thanksgivings and cried into Harold's shoulder when our first pregnancy ended in loss. Every tile, every cabinet, every window held 40 years of memory. And my son wanted to sell it out from under me while I was still breathing. "Why are you telling me this, Tate?" He looked up, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Resolve. Because Grandpa would have wanted me to. His jaw tightened. Because someone in this family has to do what's right. I've watched them for years, Grandma. The way they talk about you when you're not around. The way Dad always needs money for something. The way Mom keeps a mental tally of everything you've given them, like she's tracking a debt that never gets paid. He reached across the counter and took my hand. I'm not like them. I don't want to be like them. And I won't stand by while they do this to you. Looking at Tate, I saw Harold's eyes looking back at me, and I understood that some things pass through blood that money can never corrupt. "What are you going to do, Grandma?" I considered my answer carefully. This young man had just risked his relationship with his parents to warn me. He had chosen me over them at 23, when the cost of that choice could shape his entire future. He deserved the truth. "There's something I need to tell you, too," I said, reaching for Warren's card, still sitting on my counter beside the scattered bank statements. "Your grandfather left something behind, a kind of protection." Tate's eyes widened. "What kind of protection?" He knew, Tate. Before he died, he saw what was happening, what would continue to happen after he was gone. I turned the card over in my fingers. "He added something to his will, a provision that your parents don't know about, one that changes everything." "Changes everything how?" I smiled for the first time in days. It felt strange on my face, like a muscle I had forgotten I possessed. "Your father just threatened to put me in a retirement home and sell my house. But what he doesn't know is that the moment he humiliated me at that wedding, he triggered a clause that could cost him his entire inheritance." Tate stared at me. "Grandpa protected you." "Yes," I said, "from beyond the grave." How do you prepare yourself to learn that everything you thought you knew about your own life was only half the story? Tate had driven me to Warren's office that morning, both of us still processing the revelation I had shared. He waited in the lobby while I stepped into the elevator alone, climbing to the 7th floor of the building where Warren Thornton had practiced law for 4 decades. The receptionist led me through corridors lined with legal certificates and photographs of Nashville's skyline from different decades. Warren's corner office was exactly as I remembered it. Oak-paneled walls, leather furniture worn soft with decades of use. And there, on the wall behind his desk, a photograph of Harold and Warren at their law firm's 10th anniversary celebration. They had been young then, full of ambition and friendship and dreams they would spend the next 40 years building together. Warren's office felt like a confessional, except instead of sins. I was about to receive truths Harold had kept locked away. "Thank you for coming, Vivian." Warren rose and gestured to a chair opposite his desk. He closed the door with deliberate care. "I know this has been an overwhelming week. Warren, I need to understand what Harold left behind." I settled into the leather chair, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from trembling. "All of it. No more partial revelations. That's exactly why I asked you here." He sat down and pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "Please understand, Harold made me promise to reveal this information only under specific circumstances. Your family's behavior triggered those circumstances." "My family's behavior," I repeated. The words tasted bitter. "Let me start with the estate itself." Warren opened the folder. "Your family, Clayton, specifically believes Harold's estate is worth approximately $4 million. The house, the visible investments, the accounts they know about. $4 million. A fortune by most standards. But one Clayton had clearly been treating as an advance on his inheritance rather than a trust to be protected. That figure," Warren continued, "represents roughly 18% of the actual estate." I stared at him. 18%. Harold was extremely private about his financial affairs. Even with you, I'm afraid. Warren's voice was gentle. Over the course of 40 years, he built a separate portfolio of real estate holdings, private investments, accounts in trusts that don't bear his name. The actual value of the estate is $22 million. $22 million. I had to ask him to repeat it. 22, I whispered. Harold had $22 million, and he never told me. He told you about the life you shared, the home, the family, the love. Warren leaned forward. He kept the rest hidden, precisely because he feared what it would do to your children if they knew. He watched Clayton's relationship with money develop over the years. He saw the patterns. I thought of the spreadsheet on my dining room table, the manufactured gratitude before each request, the systematic extraction disguised as family need. He wanted to protect you, Warren continued. Not just financially, though the codicil certainly does that. He wanted to protect you from having to watch your children become something worse than they already were. Have you ever realized that the person you loved most in the world knew you better than you knew yourself? Tell me about the codicil, I said. The exact terms. Warren pulled another document from the folder. The codicil specifies 3 triggering conditions. First, public humiliation of you in front of witnesses. Second, financial coercion or exploitation. Third, any attempt to control your living situation against your will. The wedding toast, I said slowly. The brunch announcement. The retirement home scheme. All documented, all witnessed. Warren set down the paper. Based on what I've observed personally and what you've described, Clayton has already met the threshold multiple times over, so he's forfeited his inheritance. That's your decision, Vivian. The codicil gives you the power to invoke the forfeiture clause or not. Harold wanted you to have options, not obligations. Warren paused. But yes, legally speaking, Clayton and Denise are fighting for money they've already lost. They just don't know it yet. The silence stretched between us. Outside, Nashville traffic hummed 7 stories below. Inside, the grandfather clock on Warren's wall ticked through seconds that felt like years. What do I do now? The question emerged smaller than I intended. That depends on what you want. Warren leaned back in his chair. You can invoke the codicil immediately, cut Clayton off completely, and restructure the estate however you wish. Or you can wait, gather more evidence, let them reveal the full extent of their plans before you act. Watch them, I said, like Harold watched them, like Harold protected you by watching them. I nodded slowly. A strategy was forming, not revenge exactly, but something more measured, more complete. Warren reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Harold's familiar handwriting, the slight forward slant, the careful loops of the V in Vivian. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Harold wrote this letter for you. He asked me to give it to you only after you learned about the codicil. He placed it in my hands. He wanted you to understand why he did what he did. The envelope was light, just paper, but it felt like holding Harold's hand one last time. I held Harold's letter in my hands for a long moment before setting it aside. Some words needed to wait until I was strong enough to hear them. I'll read it tonight, I told Warren, alone, when I can give it the attention it deserves. He nodded, understanding, without needing explanation. 40 years of friendship with Harold had taught him when to push and when to simply be present. So, Warren folded his hands on the desk. What would you like to do with this information? The question hung between us. I could invoke the codicil today, call Clayton, tell him what I knew, watch his face crumble as he realized the fortune he'd been so eager to extract was already beyond his reach. There would be satisfaction in that. Perhaps even justice. But justice wasn't what Harold had wanted. Protection, yes. Options, certainly. But not destruction. What good is justice if it destroys any chance of redemption? I could confront them, I said slowly. End it now. But then they'd only change their behavior because of fear, not respect. And you want more than compliance. Harold hoped they'd treat me right because they loved me. I looked at the photograph on Warren's wall, my husband's young face, full of hope for a future he couldn't yet imagine. I need to know if any of them still can. Warren was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the careful precision of a man who had spent decades weighing consequences. So we test them. We observe them, I corrected. There's a difference. I'm not setting traps. I'm just opening my eyes. What does that look like, practically speaking? I had been thinking about this since Tate's visit, since the spreadsheet of exploitation took shape on my dining room table. Since I understood that my generosity had been mistaken for weakness. I stopped giving automatically, I said. I set boundaries. I pursue interests I abandoned after Harold died. The garden club, the symphony board, the friends I stopped seeing because I was too busy being available for family emergencies that somehow always required a check. Patience, I was learning, could be its own kind of weapon, sharper than anger and far more precise. And the codicil? Warren asked. Stays dormant. For now. I met his eyes. But you keep documenting everything. Every demand, every manipulation, every public comment. If they choose to cross the line again, I want the record to be irrefutable. And if they choose differently, if the boundaries inspire change rather than resentment, then maybe Harold's hope wasn't misplaced. I paused. I'm not naive, Warren. I know what I saw in Clayton's face at that brunch. But Sloan, Tate, even Drew, who I barely know yet, they might surprise me. Warren pulled a legal pad toward him and began making notes. So we observe, we document, and we let them choose their own path. Exactly. No confrontations, no ultimatums, just boundaries. And if they cross those boundaries publicly, his pen paused, then they've made their choice, and I'll make mine. The grandfather clock marked the hour, somewhere in this building. Tate was still waiting in the lobby, probably wondering what revelations were unfolding behind closed doors. There is one thing I'd like to do before I leave, I said. Warren looked up. I pulled my checkbook from my purse. The leather cover was worn soft from years of generous mistakes. But today my hand was steady. Sloane's honeymoon, I said, writing carefully. They wanted the Maldives. Denise said the booking expires today. Warren's eyebrows rose. You're giving them the trip? I'm giving them a trip. I wrote the amount, $3,000. Cape Cod in autumn is beautiful. Historic inns, seafood, long walks on empty beaches. Plenty for two young people in love to build memories. Let me tell you something about boundaries. They don't punish the people who respect them. They simply clarify what's possible and what isn't. I tore the check free and reached for an envelope from Warren's desk. Inside, I wrote a brief card. To Sloan and Drew, wishing you a lifetime of happiness together. Love always, Grandma. No explanation, no apology, no mention of the Maldives. 3,000, Warren observed. That's quite a statement. It's enough for a beautiful honeymoon, just not the one they demanded. I sealed the envelope. The message isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And if Clayton sees it as an insult, then Clayton will reveal exactly how he views my generosity as an entitlement, not a gift. I slipped the envelope into my purse. and I'll have my answer about whether any change is possible." Warren smiled, a small, careful expression that reminded me why Harold had trusted him for 4 decades. "Harold always said you were stronger than you knew." "Harold," I replied, "knew me better than I knew myself." I gathered my things, tucking Harold's unopened letter carefully into my bag alongside the sealed check. 2 messages from 2 different worlds. One from the man who had protected me in death, and one from the woman I was becoming in his absence. My phone buzzed as I stood. Clayton's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail. Watching the notification appear, 30 seconds of message. I played it in Warren's office, the speaker pressed to my ear. By the end, my hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with cold certainty. My son had just told me exactly who he had become. The sound of tires on gravel, angry, fast, told me everything I needed to know before Clayton's car even came into view. I had barely gotten home from Warren's office. Hadn't even set down my purse when the black sedan skidded to a stop in my driveway. His voicemail had been venomous enough. Accusations of senility, threats about lawyers, promises that I would regret humiliating his daughter. But hearing rage is different from seeing it arrive at your door. Clayton didn't knock. He pounded twice, then shoved the door open before I could reach it. $3,000! He stormed into my foyer, waving the check I had sent Sloan like a weapon. "For the Maldives, are you out of your mind?" He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He walked into my home like he owned it. And maybe that was the problem all along. "That check is for a honeymoon," I said, keeping my voice level. "A lovely week in Cape Cod. Plenty of newlyweds would be grateful for such generosity." Grateful. Clayton's laugh was harsh, incredulous. "Sloan is humiliated. Do you have any idea what this looks like? Denise already told the Whitfields they were going to the Maldives. Now we have to explain that Grandma decided to be cheap. I decided to set boundaries. You decided to punish us." He stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming in the enclosed space. "For what? A joke at the wedding. A toast that everyone else thought was funny. Everyone except the woman it was about." Clayton's eyes narrowed. For a moment, I saw his father in him. Not Harold's kindness, but his stubbornness when he believed he was right. Except Harold had usually been right. Clayton just believed he was entitled to be. "Dad left you everything," he said, his voice dropping to something between accusation and plea. "Everything. The house, the investments, the accounts. The least you could do is share it with your own family. That's what family does. That's what Dad would have wanted." "Don't!" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't what? Tell you the truth." Clayton spread his hands. "He'd be ashamed of you right now. Ashamed. Counting pennies while your grandchildren suffer." Hearing my son invoke Harold's name as a weapon was a kind of grief I hadn't prepared for. To have my husband's memory twisted into a tool for manipulation. To watch my own child desecrate the man who had raised him felt like a second death. But I didn't flinch. Would he? I met Clayton's eyes. I wonder what Harold would think of that toast at the wedding, of Denise announcing my donations before I'd agreed to them, of the retirement home brochures on your wife's laptop. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, then calculation. "Who told you about?" He stopped himself. "That's not what it looked like." "Then what did it look like?" "Clayton. Because from where I'm standing, it looked like my son and his wife were planning to warehouse me in a facility and sell my home. You're being paranoid. This is exactly what I mean, this erratic behavior, this suspicion. Maybe Sunrise Meadows isn't such a bad idea after all. The front door opened behind him. Tate stepped inside, still in the jacket he'd worn to Warren's office. He must have followed his father here, or perhaps he'd seen the car from the road. Either way, his face was pale with something that looked like controlled fury. That's enough, Dad. Clayton spun around. Tate, what are you doing here? I came to check on Grandma. Looks like I was right to worry. Stay out of this. Clayton's voice hardened. This is between your grandmother and me. Family business. Family business? Tate moved to stand beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. You mean the family business, where you treat her like an ATM? Where you and Mom laugh about her behind her back? Clayton's expression shifted from surprise to betrayal. You've been talking to her, filling her head with, I've been watching you, both of you, for years. Tate's voice cracked but held. Grandpa taught me what respect looks like. This isn't it. Watching Tate step between us felt like watching the future draw a line the past couldn't cross. You're choosing her over your own parents? Clayton asked incredulous. I'm choosing who to respect. And right now, Dad, it isn't you. The silence stretched. Outside, a car passed on the road. Inside, 3 generations stood frozen in a tableau of fracture. Clayton's eyes moved from Tate to me, and what I saw there wasn't just anger. It was calculation, the wheels turning, the strategies forming. This isn't over, he said, his voice dropping to something cold and deliberate. Not by a long shot. Clayton, you think you can turn my own son against me, and there won't be consequences? He stepped back toward the door, straightening his jacket with precise, controlled movements. You think you can humiliate my family in front of everyone we know and just walk away? He opened the door, autumn air rushing in. Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Mom. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the glass, I watched him stalk to his car, slam that door too, and reverse down the driveway with the same fury he'd arrived with. Tate's hand found my shoulder. Are you okay? I wasn't sure how to answer. My son had just threatened me in my own home. My grandson had just broken with his parents to defend me. I will be, I said finally. I think I will be. The first brushstroke I made in that watercolor class felt like the first breath I'd taken in 3 years. Clayton's threats had hung over me for weeks after his confrontation. But as November turned to December and December to January, something shifted. The consequences he promised never materialized, or perhaps they were materializing in ways I was no longer afraid to face. I enrolled in the watercolor class on a Tuesday morning when the winter light was pale and the Victorian estate felt too quiet. The Nashville Community Center smelled of old wood and fresh possibility. Mrs. Bellamy, the instructor with silver-streaked hair and paint-stained fingers that moved like they were conducting music, welcomed me to an easel near the window. She was perhaps 70, with the kind of calm that comes from decades of creating beauty out of chaos. In watercolor, she told me during that first lesson, we don't erase mistakes, we transform them. Grief, I was learning, had been a kind of hibernation, and I was finally emerging into spring. I painted for hours that day. My first attempts were clumsy, too much water, colors bleeding where I didn't want them to bleed. But Mrs. Bellamy simply smiled and showed me how a misplaced stroke could become a cloud, a shadow, a reflection I hadn't planned, but suddenly needed. Afterward, in the community center lobby, a voice stopped me. Vivian Mercer. Eleanor Vance stood by the coffee station, her infectious laugh already bubbling up before I could respond. We had been in the same book club for 15 years before Harold's death. I had stopped attending during his illness and never returned. "Where have you been?" Eleanor pulled me into a hug. "We've missed you terribly. Margaret asks about you every meeting." "I've been sleeping," I said, and the words felt truer than I'd expected. But I think I'm finally waking up. We made plans for lunch, then dinner, then a return to book club, where the women welcomed me back like I'd never left, where conversations about novels became conversations about life, where I remembered that friendship wasn't something I had to earn with checks. January brought cold mornings and a garden I had neglected since Harold's death. The beds were overgrown, the rose bushes skeletal, the perennials choked with weeds I'd been too numb to pull. I put on Harold's old gardening gloves and knelt in the frozen earth. Have you ever done something small, pulled a weed, turned the soil, and felt it crack open a door you'd forgotten existed? Each root I extracted felt like releasing something. Grief, guilt, the weight of expectations I had carried so long, I'd forgotten they weren't part of me. I planted bulbs for spring tulips, daffodils, hyacinths in purple and white, a promise to myself that I would still be here when they bloomed, still be free. Harold always said gardens teach patience. I was finally ready to learn. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was washing soil from my hands when Denise's name appeared on my phone. My first instinct was to let it ring through, but curiosity won. Vivian. Her voice was honey again, the same sweetness she'd deployed before every request. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just gardening." "How lovely." A pause calibrated for warmth. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. Clayton and I have been discussing the kitchen. You know how dated it's become. We found the most wonderful contractor, and he can start next month if we move quickly." "The kitchen," I repeated. "The countertops are simply embarrassing at this point. Laminate. Can you imagine? When everyone in our circle has granite or quartz?" She laughed lightly. "It's only $45,000. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really quite reasonable for the quality we're looking at." $45,000 for countertops. She said it like she was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. I thought of the spreadsheet still sitting in my dining room, the hundreds of thousands already given, the manufactured gratitude, the weaponized family gatherings, the checks written while Harold lay dying. "I'm reassessing my financial priorities." Denise. Silence. "I'm sorry." Her voice had lost its honey. "I said I'm reassessing. The kitchen renovation isn't something I'm able to fund right now." The silence stretched longer this time. When Denise spoke again, the sweetness had curdled into something cold. "I see." Each word was precise, clipped. "Well, I suppose we know where we stand now, don't we?" "I suppose we do." She hung up without saying goodbye. I set down my phone and looked around my kitchen. The kitchen I had renovated with Harold 20 years ago. The countertops we had chosen together. The cabinets he'd helped install on a long weekend when we were young and believed we had forever. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. That night, I finally opened Harold's letter. His handwriting filled 2 pages, the forward slant I knew so well, the careful loops. the places where his pen had pressed harder, with emphasis. I read it slowly, giving each sentence the weight it deserved. Most of it was love, reassurance, pride in the life we had built together. But the final paragraph stopped my breath. If you're reading this, Vivian, it means they've shown you who they are. What I'm about to tell you is why I never trusted Clayton with the truth about our finances, and why you shouldn't either. What does it look like when you invest in someone who's earned it, not demanded it? Harold's letter had kept me awake most of the night. His words about Clayton echoed through the dark hours. The money borrowed in college and never repaid, the business ventures that evaporated, the pattern of entitlement Harold had watched develop for 30 years while hoping it would change. He had seen what I had refused to see. He had prepared for what I had been too in love with my family to anticipate. But the letter had also reminded me of something else. Not everyone follows the same path. Some seeds grow toward light. Tate arrived the next afternoon with a professional folder tucked under his arm, not the nervous grandson who had appeared on my porch months ago, but a young man with purpose in his stride. I've been working on this for 2 years, he said, spreading papers across my dining room table, the same table that had held my spreadsheet of exploitation. I wanted to make sure it was solid before I brought it to you. Watching Tate present his dream felt like watching a seed Harold had planted finally break through soil. The plan was for a veterinary clinic in East Nashville, not a boutique practice for pampered pets, but affordable care for working-class families who loved their animals but couldn't always afford emergency bills. Tate had researched the neighborhood, identified a vacant building, calculated startup costs down to the medical equipment and reception desk chairs. I've done the research, Grandma. His eyes held that same quiet intensity Harold's had when he believed in something. East Nashville needs this. There's a gap in the market, good care that doesn't bankrupt families. And I want to build something real, something Grandpa would be proud of. You've put serious thought into this. 2 years of thought. He pulled out more pages, cash flow projections, first-year estimates, break-even analysis. I'm not asking for a handout. I want a business partner, someone who believes in what I'm trying to do, not just someone who'll write a check. Let me tell you the difference between entitlement and ambition. One demands what it hasn't earned, and the other works for what it wants. I studied his numbers carefully. The projections were conservative. The research was thorough. The vision was clear. This wasn't a scheme to extract money from a grieving grandmother. This was a young man trying to build something meaningful in a world that usually rewards shortcuts. $200,000, I said finally, structured as a loan at 3% interest. You'll pay me back when you're profitable, not before. Tate's face went still. Grandma, I'm not giving you a gift, Tate. I'm making an investment in you, in the clinic, in the kind of work your grandfather always believed in. I reached across the table and took his hand. Say you'll make him proud. That's enough. I will, his voice cracked slightly. I promise I will. We spent the next hour going through details, lawyers to consult, contractors to interview, timelines to establish. By the time evening fell, we had the skeleton of a partnership agreement sketched on legal paper, ready for Warren to formalize. The fire crackled in the study as Tate gathered his papers. He paused at the door. Grandma, the letter. Grandpa's letter. He turned back to face me. What did it say about Dad? I had wondered when he would ask. I had wondered what I would tell him. He saw the pattern decades ago, I said carefully. Your father learned to see money as a solution, not a responsibility. It started in college loans he never repaid, opportunities he expected others to fund. Harold hoped it would change. It didn't. In that moment, sitting across from my grandson, I understood what Harold had been protecting all along. Not just me, but this. The possibility that someone in our family would choose a different path. And he protected you anyway, Tate said quietly, even from beyond the grave. He tried to protect all of us from what your father became and from what I might have enabled if I'd known the full truth earlier. I paused. But mostly, I think, he was protecting the future, making sure there would be resources left for people who would use them well. Tate nodded slowly. I won't let him down. I know you won't. He hugged me, a real embrace, not the obligatory gesture his parents offered at holidays, and left with a signed agreement and a promise to call Warren in the morning. I was washing our coffee cups when my phone buzzed. Sloane's name glowed on the screen. My granddaughter, the newlywed, the one who had looked away when her father humiliated me at the wedding. We hadn't spoken since I sent the Cape Cod check. I answered. Grandma. Her voice was shaky, pitched low like she was afraid of being overheard. I need to tell you something. What is it, sweetheart? Mom and Dad are planning something for your birthday next month. She paused, and I heard her swallow. It's not a party. They're meeting with a lawyer tomorrow about... Another hesitation, longer this time. About taking control of your finances. They're saying you're not competent, that you're making dangerous decisions. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering in the sink. Dad said the clinic investment proves you've lost your judgment. Sloane's voice cracked. Grandma, I'm scared for you. The text messages started arriving like artillery shells, calculated, relentless, each one designed to hit a different wound. Sloane's warning had prepared me for something, but not for this sustained assault of words dressed as concern. In the weeks following, Denise's messages evolved from honeyed requests to thinly veiled accusations. I hope you're happy destroying what's left of this family. Clayton can't sleep. He's worried sick about you. Everyone at church asks about you. I don't know what to tell them anymore. Let me tell you something about harassment. It doesn't have to be loud to be relentless. It can come in the form of worried sighs and unsolicited advice, and carefully chosen silences that speak louder than screaming ever could. Clayton began visiting twice a week. He never called first. He would simply appear at my door, brow furrowed with theatrical concern, scanning the rooms as he walked through my home. Mom, I'm worried about you rattling around this big house alone. He stood in my parlor one March afternoon, eyes cataloging the antique furniture, the crown molding, the space. At your age, the stairs alone must be exhausting. Have you thought more about Sunrise Meadows? They have lovely accommodations. I'm 67, Clayton, not 97. These things can change quickly. His voice was soft, sympathetic, but his gaze kept drifting to the bay windows, the original hardwood floors, the features that would make this house worth millions to the right buyer. Dad would have wanted you to be safe. Clayton's visits felt like a wolf checking the fence for weaknesses. Patient, methodical, waiting for the right moment to strike. I watched him assess the library, the kitchen, Harold's study. He asked about maintenance costs, property taxes, whether I'd considered what would happen if something unexpected occurred. Each question was framed as care. Each answer, he noted, somewhere behind those calculating eyes. "I've been thinking about the clinic funding," he said one afternoon, abandoning pretense as the visit stretched into its second hour. "Tate's little animal hospital. What about it? So you have money for his project, but not for your own son's family?" The mask slipped. Just for a moment, a flash of that cold entitlement I glimpsed at the brunch. 200,000 for a nephew's dream, but 45,000 for your daughter-in-law's kitchen is too much to ask. "Tate asked," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He didn't demand. He presented a business plan. He wanted a partnership, not a handout. There's a difference." Clayton, his jaw tightened. "We'll see how long that attitude lasts." He left without saying goodbye, and I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the driveway. The spring garden was beginning to bloom. The bulbs I'd planted in January pushing green shoots through the soil. I had promised myself I would still be here when they flowered. I intended to keep that promise. April brought warmer weather and an unexpected call. "Grandma," Sloane's voice was tired, strained, carrying the weight of something more than the family conflict. "Sloane, it's good to hear from you." Silence stretched across the line. When she spoke again, I heard tears threatening. "I'm pregnant, due in November. A great-grandchild, Harold's lineage continuing into another generation." Joy and fear tangled together in my chest. "Oh, sweetheart, congratulations." Drew is thrilled. We wanted to wait to tell people until we were sure everything was okay. But she trailed off. "Mom and Dad are so angry, Grandma, about everything. They barely talk about anything else anymore. And I miss you. I want you to be part of this baby's life, but I don't know how to." Hearing Sloane's exhausted voice, I understood something. She wasn't just caught in the middle. She was drowning in it. "You don't have to choose, sweetheart," I said gently. "Your parents are adults. Their anger is theirs to manage. But you do have to decide who you want to be. What kind of mother? What kind of daughter? What kind of person?" "I don't know how to do any of this." "Nobody does. We figure it out as we go." I paused. "Your grandfather would be so happy. Sloane, a great-grandchild. He would have danced around this kitchen." She laughed through tears, a small sound, but genuine. "He would have spoiled this baby rotten. That's what great-grandparents are for." We talked for another 20 minutes. About the pregnancy, about Drew, about small things that had nothing to do with money or manipulation. By the time she hung up, something had shifted. Not resolved, not yet, but shifted. I sat in the gathering dark, thinking about the baby Sloane carried, Harold's great-grandchild, a future that extended beyond this fight, beyond the wounds we were all inflicting on each other. My phone buzzed again. Warren's name. I answered with a sense of dread I couldn't quite explain. "Vivian?" His voice was tight, controlled. "We need to meet tomorrow, if possible." "What happened?" "I've just learned Clayton retained an attorney, a man named Gerald Ashworth. He specializes in elder law and conservatorships." Warren paused, and in that pause, I heard everything he wasn't saying yet. "They're preparing paperwork claiming cognitive decline, diminished capacity. They're going to present it at your birthday dinner next month. They're planning to have you declared incompetent, Vivian. They want control of everything. Tate's hands were shaking when he walked through my door, and my grandson's hands never shake. I had just finished speaking with Warren about the conservatorship threat when Tate appeared, pale and agitated, still wearing his work clothes from the architecture firm. He didn't bother with greetings. "I heard them. Grandma." He closed the door behind him and leaned against it like he needed the support. Every word. They're not just planning something. They've already started. "Slow down." I guided him to the couch. "Tell me exactly what you heard." I went to the house to pick up some things I'd left behind. Dad and Mom were in the study with that attorney. The door was cracked. He swallowed hard. "They're claiming you're mentally incompetent, that you can't handle your own affairs." In that moment, watching my grandson's hands tremble, I understood this was not just about money anymore. This was about erasing me. What exactly did they say? Tate pulled out his phone. I recorded part of it. I didn't know what else to do. He played the audio, tinny and distant, but unmistakable. Clayton's voice, confident and practiced. "The pattern is clear." She refused to fund the honeymoon, an event she'd already committed to. Then she gave $200,000 to her grandson for some veterinary clinic without any business oversight. She's taking art classes, for God's sake, at her age. Denise's voice cut in. "And the garden. She's out there digging in the dirt like a madwoman. The neighbors have noticed." "They're using your kindness to Sloan as proof you're declining," Tate said, stopping the recording. "And the clinic investment. They're calling it disposing of assets to unqualified family members. When does protecting yourself from your own children stop being paranoia and start being survival?" "They've built a whole case," Tate continued. "Every boundary you've set, every time you've said no, every time you've done something for yourself instead of them, they're twisting it. The art classes prove you're regressing to childhood activities. The garden proves you're disconnected from reality. Refusing the kitchen renovation proves you're hostile and irrational. They're trying to steal my life by calling my choices crazy." "It gets worse," Tate's voice dropped. "The attorney Ashworth, he's drafting power of attorney papers, emergency conservatorship. They want full control of your finances, your property, your medical decisions, everything. They were building a cage out of my own kindness, and they expected me to walk into it willingly." "When?" I asked. "When are they planning to do this?" Tate met my eyes. "Your birthday dinner, next month." Before I tell you what they planned for that dinner, I need to pause. If you're still with me, comment your guess. Will this birthday end in humiliation or revelation? Just one sentence. And please note, some details ahead are dramatized for emotional impact. The lesson behind them is what matters. The birthday dinner, the gathering they had insisted on hosting at the country club, the celebration they had been planning for weeks with such theatrical enthusiasm. "They're going to do it in front of everyone," Tate said. "Family, friends, the Whitfields, people from church. They think humiliating you publicly will make you give in, that you'll be so ashamed, so overwhelmed, that you'll sign whatever they put in front of you just to make it stop." I thought of the wedding toast, the brunch announcement, the calculated public degradation that had opened my eyes to what my family had become. "They think I'll fold," I said slowly. "They don't know what your grandfather left behind." Tate straightened. "The codicil, the forfeiture clause. If they humiliate me publicly, in front of witnesses, with documented intent to control my finances against my will. They trigger every condition Harold put in place. I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, not grief, something harder and more precise. They're building the instrument of their own disinheritance. Then we show them, Tate's voice steadied, together, at the dinner. We let them make their move, and then we reveal everything. It's a risk if something goes wrong. Grandma. He took my hand steady now, resolved. They've already declared war. You didn't start this, but you're going to finish it. We sat in silence as evening shadows lengthened across the study. The clock ticked. Outside, the garden I had reclaimed bloomed with the bulbs I'd planted in January, proof that I was still here, still building, still planning for a future they wanted to steal. There's one more thing, Tate said, his voice dropping. The attorney they hired, Ashworth. I looked him up. He specializes in elder law cases, but not protecting elders. What do you mean? He's known for getting families control of estates. There are reviews online from other families. Grateful children talking about how he helped them take over their parents' finances. Tate met my eyes with something between horror and determination. Grandma, they're not just trying to manage your money. They're trying to take everything. Your house, your investments, your decisions, while you're still alive to watch. The words hung in the air between us. My son wanted to erase me while I was still breathing, to reduce me to a signature on documents I didn't choose, a body in a facility I didn't want, a name on accounts I couldn't access. But Harold had seen this coming, and so had I. Call Warren, I said. Tell him we need to meet tomorrow. We have a birthday party to plan. There is a particular kind of calm that comes when you stop being afraid and start preparing. I had spent the night after Tate's revelation, unable to sleep, but not from fear. My mind was working through possibilities, contingencies, the choreography of what was to come. By morning, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Gerald Ashworth might specialize in stripping elders of their autonomy, but he had never faced Harold Mercer's foresight or his widow's resolve. Warren's conference table was covered with documents when I arrived at his office. He had been working through the night as well, compiling a timeline that read like an indictment. The documentation is thorough, Warren said, spreading papers across the mahogany surface. The wedding toast, recorded by 3 different guests on their phones. The brunch announcement, witnessed by 40 people. The text from Denise, which you forwarded to me. Clayton's recorded conversation about the conservatorship. Warren's documentation read like a prosecution brief, except the defendant did not know he was already on trial. The toast alone would likely trigger the codicil. Warren continued, but combined with everything else, it's overwhelming. Any judge would see the pattern. And if Clayton announces the power of attorney publicly at my birthday dinner, then he hands us the final piece himself. Warren met my eyes. I will attend as a family friend. The moment he makes his move, the moment he tries to humiliate you into signing, I produce the codicil and invoke the forfeiture clause. In front of witnesses, with documentation. They'll claim I manipulated Harold, that I influenced the codicil. The codicil was filed 6 months before Harold's death, during a period when 3 independent physicians confirmed his mental clarity. I have their statements. Warren paused. Harold anticipated that argument. He prepared for everything. I reached into my purse and pulled out Harold's letter. The pages I had finally read in full after Denise's last phone call. "I want you to hear this," I said, "what he wrote to me." Warren nodded, and I began to read. Harold's handwriting filled the pages with 43 years of love and 10 years of worry. He wrote about watching Clayton in college, the borrowed money that was never repaid, the excuses that grew more elaborate, the charm that replaced character. One small deception at a time. Reading Harold's words, I felt him beside me again, not as a ghost, but as a shield. I watched our son learn that manipulation could substitute for effort. I read aloud. I watched him marry a woman who amplified his worst instincts rather than challenging them. I hoped he would change. He did not. I could not fix him, Vivian, but I could protect you. Warren was silent. He saw it for decades, I said, folding the letter. He tried to warn me. I didn't listen. You loved your son. That's not a crime. No, but it made me blind. I tucked the letter back into my purse. Harold saved me, even from beyond the grave. Now it's time for me to save myself. We spent the next 3 hours finalizing the strategy. Warren would arrive early to my birthday dinner, positioning himself near the study where the codicil documents would be waiting. Tate would be there as support. The moment Clayton produced his power of attorney papers, Warren would step forward. The trap would close. But not on me. Days later, I sat at my writing desk and composed the invitations by hand, cream cardstock, black ink, the elegant penmanship Harold had always admired. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 68th birthday of Vivian Mercer. Dinner at 7, Victorian Estate, Belle Mead. I sent them to Clayton and Denise, to Sloan and Drew, to Tate, and to Warren as a family friend. I addressed each envelope with care, sealing them with the wax stamp Harold had given me for our 20th anniversary. Let me tell you something about traps. The most effective ones look exactly like opportunities to the people walking into them. Denise's reply arrived within hours. We wouldn't miss it for the world. Family is everything. The words dripped with false sweetness and transparent eagerness. They thought I was walking into their ambush. They had no idea I was setting my own. Tate texted that evening, "I'll be there, we'll be there, together." Sloane's response came last, hesitant and careful. "Drew and I will come. I've missed you, Grandma." I read her words 3 times, searching for hidden meaning. Was she still caught between loyalties? Had she chosen a side? I wouldn't know until the dinner itself. The morning of my 68th birthday. I woke before dawn. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the sun rise over Belle Mead, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The garden below was in full summer bloom. The bulbs I had planted in January, now a riot of color. I had promised myself I would still be here when they flowered. I had kept that promise. Tonight my family would gather in this house. Some would come to celebrate me. Others would come to destroy me. By midnight, everyone would know the difference. I smoothed my dress, a deep burgundy Harold had loved, and went downstairs to prepare. The dining room table was set for 7. Crystal glasses caught the morning light. Silver gleamed against white linen. Every detail was perfect. The stage was set for celebration. The reckoning was set for 8. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock, and I understood with sudden clarity that the next few hours would determine everything. I smoothed my burgundy dress one final time and walked to the door. Warren was already positioned in the living room, a glass of wine in his hand, looking every inch the old family friend, enjoying a casual evening. The codicil documents waited in the study, ready to be produced at the right moment. Clayton and Denise stood on my porch, overdressed and overeager. Denise wore a champagne silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Clayton had chosen a charcoal suit, as if this were a business meeting rather than a birthday dinner. "Happy birthday, Mom." Clayton kissed my cheek, his cologne overwhelming. "You look wonderful." "Vivian, the house looks wonderful." Denise swept past me, her eyes scanning every surface, every corner. "You've been busy." "Such interesting choices." They moved into the living room, and I watched Clayton's face change the moment he spotted Warren. Watching Clayton register Warren's presence was like watching a fox realize the henhouse door had a lock on the inside. "Warren," Clayton's voice went flat, "I didn't realize you would be here. Your mother and I have been friends for years." Warren rose smoothly, extending his hand. "I wouldn't miss her birthday. Harold would have wanted someone from the old days to help celebrate." Clayton shook his hand, but I saw the calculation behind his eyes. Warren was Harold's attorney. Warren knew things. Warren's presence was not part of the plan Clayton had so carefully constructed. "How lovely," Denise said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "The more the merrier." The doorbell rang again. Sloane and Drew stood on the porch. Sloane, visibly pregnant now, in a flowing blue dress that couldn't quite hide her nerves. Drew held her hand, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he knew something was happening tonight, but not exactly what. "Grandma." Sloane stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, holding on longer than a casual greeting required. Her lips brushed my ear. "I'm so sorry for everything." When Sloane whispered those words against my shoulder, I felt something I had not felt in months. Hope that my granddaughter might still choose love. "You're here now," I said quietly, pulling back to look at her face. "That's what matters." Drew shook my hand and offered birthday wishes. He seemed kind. This young man my granddaughter had married. I hoped he would be strong enough for what was coming. Tate arrived last, slipping through the door with purpose in his stride. He wore a simple navy blazer and the steady expression of someone who had prepared for battle. "Happy birthday, Grandma!" He hugged me briefly, then positioned himself at my side. His voice dropped to a murmur. "I'm right here, whatever happens." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on it." 7 of us gathered in my dining room. The table gleamed with crystal and silver. Candles flickering in antique holders Harold and I had collected during our anniversary trips to Europe. I had prepared everything myself: the roasted chicken, the vegetables from my garden, the rolls from the bakery Harold had loved. Seating was strategic. I took the head of the table, Warren at my right, Tate at my left. Clayton and Denise sat across from each other in the middle. Sloane and Drew occupied the far end, Sloane's hand resting protectively on her belly. The first course was served: butternut squash soup, garnished with cream and herbs. "This soup is lovely. Vivian!" Denise's voice carried the false brightness of someone filling silence. "You always did know how to set a table." "Thank you, Denise." Clayton kept glancing at Warren, trying to read something in the older man's calm demeanor. Warren simply sipped his wine and complimented the soup. "So, how is the law practice these days, Warren?" Clayton's tone was casual, but I heard the probe beneath. "Staying busy." "Very." Warren dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "Estate work keeps me quite occupied." You'd be surprised how many families need help sorting out complicated situations. Clayton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Have you ever sat at a dinner table knowing that everyone present was waiting for a bomb to go off, and you were the only one who knew the detonator was in your pocket? The main course came and went. Conversation limped along, discussion of the weather, of Sloane's pregnancy, of Tate's clinic progress. Clayton grew increasingly restless. Denise maintained her brittle smile. Warren ate with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. Dessert approached. I could feel Clayton gathering himself, preparing for the moment he had been planning for months. The dishes were cleared. Coffee was poured. Clayton set down his wine glass with deliberate precision. He cleared his throat, and the sound cut through the candlelit room like a blade. "Before dessert," he announced, his voice carrying across the table with rehearsed authority, "Denise and I have something important to discuss, a family matter." Sloane's hand flew to her belly. Drew looked confused. Tate went very still. Clayton looked directly at me, and I saw it in his eyes, the absolute certainty that he was about to win, that his mother would crumble under public pressure just as she always had, that the power of attorney papers in his breast pocket would be signed before the birthday cake was cut. Warren's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket pocket. I set down my coffee cup and waited. Clayton stood up from his chair, and in that moment I realized he had rehearsed this, every word, every gesture, every calculated pause. As I said, Denise and I have been discussing some concerns. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward with the posture of a man delivering difficult news. Family concerns. About you, Mom. The candlelight flickered. No one moved. We've been worried about you, living alone in this big house, making decisions without consulting family. His voice dripped with practiced sympathy. Since Dad passed, you haven't been yourself. We've all noticed. Denise nodded gravely, her champagne silk catching the light. We only want what's best for you, Vivian, truly. I said nothing. Warren's hand remained near his pocket. Tate's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. The changes started small, Clayton continued. Skipping family dinners, spending hours in the garden, taking up art classes. He said the last words as if they were evidence of dementia rather than healing. But then the decisions became more concerning. Listening to my son list my crimes of independence, I understood something in his mind. My only acceptable role was silent benefactor. The honeymoon situation was embarrassing for everyone, Clayton said. Sloane was humiliated. You'd committed to a gift, and then you publicly retracted it. Made her look foolish in front of her new in-laws. Sloane flinched but said nothing. Drew put his hand over hers. And the kitchen renovation, $45,000. Mom, a reasonable request from family, and you said no. Clayton shook his head slowly. But then, and this is what really concerned us, you gave away $200,000. The number hung in the air. $200,000, he repeated, to fund a veterinary clinic. In this economy, for a business your grandson has never run before. $200,000. He said it like it was evidence of insanity. I thought of Harold and what he would say about a man who calls ambition a pipe dream and investment in family a sign of mental failure. Tate started to speak, but I caught his eye and shook my head slightly. Not yet. These are not the decisions of a woman thinking clearly, Clayton said. A woman in full possession of her faculties doesn't refuse family and then give away a fortune to an unproven venture.
It's not rational. It's not responsible.
It's concerning, Denise added helpfully. So we've talked to professionals. Clayton reached into his jacket pocket. An attorney who specializes in these situations. A doctor who can provide evaluation services. People who understand what families go through when a loved one begins to... He paused, choosing his words with theatrical care. Decline. The papers emerged from his pocket. Legal documents, forms and signatures, lines, and the cold machinery of institutional control. We're seeking power of attorney. Mom. He set the papers on the table. For your own protection, so we can help you manage your affairs. Make sure the estate is handled properly. Ensure you're living somewhere safe. Our attorney says it's a straightforward process, Denise said brightly. You just need to sign. Tate rose from his chair. This is insane. Grandma is the sharpest person at this table. She's not declining. She's finally standing up for herself. Tate, Clayton's voice hardened. This doesn't concern you. The hell it doesn't. You're trying to steal her life because she stopped writing you blank checks. We're trying to protect her. You're trying to control her. Tate's voice cracked with fury. Just like you've been trying to control everyone for years. But she sees you now. We all see you. When Tate started to rise, ready to fight for me, I felt my heart swell, but I also knew this battle was mine to finish. I placed my hand on Tate's arm. Sit down, sweetheart. He looked at me, confusion and protectiveness warring in his eyes. Sit down, I repeated gently. I've got this. He sat. The room went silent. Clayton slid the papers across the table toward me. A pen was placed deliberately on top expensive silver, probably bought just for this occasion. Just sign, Mom. His voice softened into what he probably thought was tenderness. Let us take care of everything. You don't have to worry about the house, the investments, any of it. We'll handle it all. You can relax. Enjoy your golden years. Sloane had tears streaming down her face. Drew stared at the table. Warren sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. I looked at the papers, at the pen, at the son who had transformed a birthday dinner into an ambush, who had weaponized my independence as evidence of incompetence, who was asking me to sign away my life because I had dared to say no. I looked at Clayton, really looked at him, and saw the man he had become, not the boy I had raised, not the son I had loved through scraped knees and college applications and his wedding day. This was someone else, someone Harold had seen decades ago, and I had refused to believe existed. The paper sat untouched between us. Sign, Mom, Clayton said again, an edge creeping into his voice. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I picked up the pen. Clayton's face relaxed with premature triumph. I set the pen down on my side of the table, well away from the documents. No, Clayton. 2 words. The 2 most powerful words I had ever spoken. No. The silence after my no stretched across the dining room like a held breath, and I watched my son's face transform from confidence to confusion to fury. No. Clayton's voice cracked on the word. You're saying no. I believe that's what I said. He stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. This was not part of his script. This was not how the evening was supposed to unfold. In his carefully rehearsed scenario, I was supposed to crumble under the weight of public pressure, sign his papers, and surrender my life to his management. After everything we've done for you, his voice rose. After Dad left you everything? After we've spent years worrying about you, checking on you, making sure you were okay in this big, empty house. Checking on me, I repeated quietly. Is that what you call it? Clayton, Denise reached for his arm. Perhaps we should discuss this more calmly. Give your mother time to think. Calm. He shook her off. She's throwing away our future because she's too proud to admit she needs help. Watching my son's face contort with rage was like watching a mask finally crack and fall away, revealing what had always been underneath. Your future, I said. That's an interesting way to describe my estate. It's family money. Dad built it for all of us. Your father built it through 40 years of honest work, and he left it to me, not to you, not to Denise, to me. I kept my voice steady. To do with as I see fit. Clayton's hands clenched on the tablecloth. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the half hour. You're being selfish, he said. Hoarding money you don't even need while your family struggles. Struggles? Tate's voice cut in. You drive a Mercedes. Dad, you took 3 vacations last year. What exactly are you struggling with? Stay out of this. Tate. No. Someone needs to say what everyone's thinking. You're not worried about Grandma. You're worried about your inheritance. Clayton turned on his son with something ugly in his eyes. You've already gotten your piece, haven't you? $200,000 for your little animal hospital. Very convenient that you're on her side. I'm on her side because she's right. You're on her side because she bought you. The words landed like a slap. Tate went pale, then red. That's enough, my voice cut through the room. Clayton, sit down. Don't tell me what to do. He was beyond reason now, beyond strategy. The veneer of the concerned son had burned away entirely. You selfish old woman. You're senile, and you don't even know it. When he invoked Harold's name as a weapon against me, I felt the last thread of my hope for him snap. Dad would be ashamed of you right now. Clayton continued, his voice rising. Ashamed of what you've become. A bitter, paranoid old woman, hoarding money and turning family against each other. Would he? I met my son's eyes. I wonder what Harold would think of this performance, of his son trying to steal his widow's autonomy at her birthday dinner, of power of attorney papers produced over dessert. Sloane was crying silently. Drew had his arm around her. Denise had gone very still, perhaps finally realizing how badly this was going wrong. But Clayton couldn't stop. The rage had taken him somewhere beyond calculation. You're incompetent, he said, and if you won't sign voluntarily, we'll get a court to declare it. We have documentation. We have witnesses. We have, if I may. Warren Thornton rose slowly from his chair. Have you ever watched someone walk into a trap they set for you, so confident in their own cleverness that they never saw the walls closing in? Clayton spun toward him. This is a family matter. Warren, stay out of it. That is precisely why I cannot. Warren's voice carried the calm authority of 4 decades of legal practice. Your father anticipated this exact moment. What are you talking about? Warren reached into his jacket pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a cream-colored envelope. Even in the candlelight, I could see Harold's familiar handwriting on the front. For Vivian, when the time comes. Clayton's face went pale. Denise gripped the edge of the table. "What is that?" Clayton demanded. "This is a codicil to your father's will." Warren held the envelope so everyone could see it. Jailed 6 months before Harold's death, during a period when 3 independent physicians confirmed his full mental competency. I have their statements on file. A codicil? About what? Warren looked at me. I nodded. About this, Warren said. About what would happen if Harold's fears about how his family would treat his widow proved justified. About what would happen if his children chose to humiliate her, manipulate her, or attempt to control her against her will. The room had gone absolutely silent. Even Clayton seemed frozen. Harold loved his family, Warren continued, but he wasn't blind. He saw patterns developing long before his death, and he prepared accordingly. Prepared how? Denise's voice was barely a whisper. Warren's gaze moved from Clayton to Denise and back again. His voice was calm and final. Your father's last word on the matter. And I'm afraid, Clayton, it changes everything. Warren opened the envelope with the deliberate care of a man who understood that the next words he spoke would redraw the lines of a family forever. The paper inside was crisp, formal, bearing Harold's signature at the bottom, alongside the signatures of 2 witnesses and a notary seal. Warren held it up to the candlelight and began to read. I, Harold James Mercer, being of sound mind and body, do hereby add this codicil to my last will and testament. Any descendant, including children, grandchildren, and their spouses, who publicly humiliates, financially coerces, or attempts to control my beloved wife Vivian against her will, shall forfeit their entire share of my estate. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. This forfeiture is absolute and non-negotiable. Warren continued. It applies to any attempt to diminish her dignity, question her competency without legitimate medical cause, or manipulate her through emotional or financial pressure. Watching Warren read Harold's words felt like watching my husband reach through death to shield me one final time. This is ridiculous, Clayton's voice cracked. You can't enforce something like that. It's not even legal. I assure you it is. Warren set down the codicil and reached for the folder beside his plate. The document was prepared by 3 independent attorneys, reviewed by a retired judge, and filed with the probate court 6 months before Harold's death. During that period, 3 physicians confirmed his full mental competency. I have their statements here. He opened the folder and spread papers across the tablecloth like cards in a losing hand. October 2024, wedding reception. Warren's voice was measured, relentless. You referred to your mother as the family insurance policy before 200 guests, multiple witnesses, video evidence from 3 phones. Clayton's face went pale, then red. The same weekend, Sunday brunch, Denise announced that Vivian would fund a honeymoon she had not agreed to, publicly committing her money without consent. Those were jokes, Denise protested. Family jokes. You can't possibly. Tonight, Warren continued as if she hadn't spoken. You accused your mother of senility, demanded she sign power of attorney papers, threatened court action if she refused. He met Clayton's eyes. In front of 6 witnesses at her own birthday dinner. The full weight of it settled over the room. I watched the number register on Clayton's face, the entire estate. The fortune he had been scheming to control, slipping through his fingers like sand. The language is unambiguous, Warren said. Harold anticipated this possibility. He saw patterns developing years before his death, and he prepared accordingly. Every condition of the codicil has been met, multiple times over. Clayton turned to me. You knew about this. This whole time, you knew. I learned about it after your wedding toast, I said quietly. Harold hoped it would never be needed. He wanted you to treat me well because you loved me, not because you feared losing your inheritance. And instead, you set a trap. I set nothing. You walked into this yourself. Clayton, every choice was yours. Warren gathered the papers and turned to face me directly. The room held its breath. Vivian. His voice was gentle but formal. As executor of Harold's estate and witness to the events documented here, I must ask you formally, do you wish to enforce the codicil as written? The silence stretched. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, one final time. I remembered him as a baby in my arms, a toddler learning to walk, a boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard. I remembered his wedding day, his children's births, the moments when I had believed we were a family bound by love rather than obligation. But I also remembered the toast, the brunch, the texts and threats and manufactured gratitude, the retirement home brochures, the power of attorney papers lying untouched on my table. When I said yes, I was not just enforcing a legal document. I was finally saying no to a lifetime of being treated as less than. Yes, I said, I do. Clayton's chair crashed backward as he stood. His face had gone purple, his hands shaking at his sides. You can't do this, his voice came out strangled. That money is ours. Dad would never have wanted. Harold wanted exactly this, Warren said calmly. He wrote it himself. He signed it himself. He made his wishes absolutely clear. I'll contest it in every court. I'll spend years tearing this apart. You're welcome to try, but the documentation is thorough, the witnesses are credible, and the legal foundation is sound. Warren began returning papers to his folder. You will lose, and you will spend a great deal of money doing so. Clayton grabbed Denise's arm, pulling her up from her chair. She stumbled, her champagne silk dress catching on the table edge. You will regret this, he hissed at me. Both of you. I will destroy everything you care about. He stormed toward the door, dragging Denise behind him. But at the threshold, he turned back one final time. His eyes found mine across the ruined dinner, across the candlelight and cold food and the wreckage of what had once been a family. You think you've won. His voice was ice and venom. This family is dead. You killed it tonight. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. And then there was silence. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. And then there was silence. The kind of silence that follows an explosion, when the dust is still settling and you are not yet sure what remains standing. Clayton's car engine roared to life in the driveway. Tires screeched on gravel. And then he was gone, Denise with him, their rage echoing in the empty spaces they left behind. No one moved. Sloane sat frozen at the table, tears streaming silently down her face. Drew had his arm around her, looking shell-shocked. Warren was already gathering documents with practiced efficiency, tucking the codicil and evidence back into his folder. Tate stood beside my chair, close enough that I could feel his presence, like a steadying hand. The dining room looked like a battlefield after the armies had withdrawn, chairs askew, candles guttering low. victory hollow in the silence. "I'll handle the legal proceedings," Warren said, breaking the stillness. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of a man who had navigated family destruction before. "He can contest if he wants, but the codicil is airtight. Harold made certain of that." "Thank you, Warren." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, steady, too steady. "Get some rest tonight. I'll call tomorrow to discuss next steps." He paused at my side, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Vivian. Harold would be proud." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Sloane rose from her chair, her face blotched with tears. Drew helped her up, his own expression a mixture of concern and confusion. He had married into something he didn't fully understand, but he was learning fast. "Grandma," Sloane crossed to where I sat and knelt beside my chair. "I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. I knew what they were planning, and You warned me," I reminded her gently. "You called. You told me about the lawyer. It wasn't enough. I should have stood up to them. I should have." "You're here now." I touched her face, wiping away tears. "That's what matters." When Sloane hugged me goodbye, I felt something shift, as if she were choosing, right there in my arms, who she wanted to become. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered against my shoulder. "I'm going to be different, I promise. I'm not going to be like them." "I know, sweetheart. You never were." Drew shook my hand, then seemed to think better of it, and hugged me too. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Mercer," he said awkwardly. "I'm sorry it turned out like this. Some birthdays are more memorable than others." He almost smiled. Warren left first, folder tucked under his arm, with a final nod of reassurance. Sloane and Drew followed, Sloane looking back over her shoulder as if committing me to memory. Then they were gone, their car pulling down the driveway into the summer night. The house settled into quiet. Tate moved to stand beside me. "I'll stay tonight," he said, "if that's okay." "It's okay." He went to the kitchen and began making tea. I heard the familiar sounds, kettle filling, cups clinking. The ritual of comfort that had marked hard conversations in this house for 40 years. When Harold was alive, he would make tea after every crisis. It was his way of saying the world had not ended, that warmth and normalcy could be reclaimed. I moved to the study and sank into Harold's leather chair. The leather was worn soft from decades of use, molded to his shape and now to mine. His reading glasses still sat on the desk. His books lined the walls. In this room, surrounded by his things, I could almost feel him beside me. Tate appeared with 2 cups of tea, honey already stirred in the way I liked. He handed me one and settled into the chair across from me, the chair that had been Harold's when we had our evening conversations. "Let me tell you something about doing the right thing. Sometimes it breaks your heart anyway." "I never wanted it to come to this," I said quietly. The tea warmed my hands. "He's still my son, whatever he's become, whatever he's done. I held him when he was born. I taught him to ride a bicycle. I watched him graduate." "I know, Grandma. I keep looking for the moment when everything went wrong, the choice I made, the thing I didn't see. But it wasn't any single moment, was it? It was years, decades of small permissions, small accommodations." Tate leaned forward. "You didn't cause this. You just stopped allowing it." The words landed somewhere deep. I felt tears prick at my eyes, the first I had allowed all evening. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," I said. "He always knew you were different. He saw it when you were just a boy. He told me once that character isn't inherited, it's chosen. Tate's voice was rough with emotion. I think about that a lot. We sat in comfortable silence, tea cooling, the house quiet around us. Tate's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face went still. "It's Dad." His voice was flat. "He's telling me I have to choose, them or you. He says if I stay here tonight, I'm not welcome in his home again." My heart clenched. Tate. He looked at me with those eyes so like Harold's, steady, clear, decided. "I already chose. Grandma, I chose months ago." He silenced the phone and set it face down on the table. "What does it look like when something beautiful grows from the ashes of something broken?" 3 months had passed since Tate silenced his father's ultimatum and set the phone face down on my table. 3 months of lawyers and paperwork and the slow, painful work of rebuilding. And now I stood on the sidewalk in East Nashville, looking up at a converted Victorian house with a fresh sign above the door, Mercer Veterinary Clinic. Tate met me at the entrance, wearing a white coat with his name embroidered above the pocket. He looked different, older somehow, more certain. The nervous grandson who had brought me his business plan felt like a distant memory. "Welcome to Mercer Veterinary Clinic, Grandma," he grinned, gesturing at the building with barely contained pride. "Your investment." "My dream." "Our dream," I corrected him. Harold would have loved this. The clinic was housed in a Victorian home, much like my own, as if Tate had found a way to build the future inside the architecture of the past. He gave me the tour. The waiting room was bright and welcoming, with comfortable seating and a play area for children. On one wall hung my contribution, a watercolor mural I had painted over the past month, a whimsical forest scene with hidden animals tucked among the trees and flowers. Children could search for them while their parents waited. "The mural is perfect," Tate said. 3 families have already commented on it. "I keep thinking about how different this would look if you hadn't believed in me," he continued, his voice growing serious. "If you'd given that money to Dad instead, it would have disappeared into some scheme. But this," he gestured at the exam rooms, the equipment, the dream made real. "This helps people." I touched his arm. "You would have found a way, with or without me." "Maybe, but it wouldn't have meant the same thing." Warren had called last month with the news I had been waiting for. Clayton's legal contest had been dismissed. The judge found the codicil properly executed, the documentation overwhelming, the forfeiture clause triggered beyond any reasonable doubt. Clayton and Denise had lost on every count. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes when you stop waiting for the people who hurt you to apologize and simply start living without them. Clayton and Denise had moved to Florida shortly after the dismissal. He had taken a job with a former business associate, something in insurance sales, I gathered. We didn't speak. The only communication was a formal Christmas card, addressed in Denise's handwriting, saying nothing of substance. I thought I would feel more when it was over. Triumph, perhaps, or grief. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. The weight of constantly bracing for the next attack had lifted. The endless cycle of manufactured gratitude and subsequent demands had stopped. My money was my own. My life was my own. Florida seemed fitting a place to start over, or at least to disappear. The clinic's front door chimed, and Tate excused himself to greet his first patients of the afternoon. A young family entered, a mother, father, and their 8-year-old daughter, leading a scruffy rescue dog on a leash. The dog was missing one ear and walked with a slight limp, but his tail wagged furiously as he explored his new surroundings. "We heard about this place from a friend," the mother said. "She said you actually care, that you don't just see animals as billing opportunities." "That's the plan." Tate knelt down to the dog's level, letting the animal sniff his hand. "Affordable care for families who love their pets. Everyone deserves access to good medicine." The little girl giggled as the dog licked Tate's face. Her parents smiled the relieved smile of people who had been worried about cost and were discovering they had found something rare. Watching Tate kneel down to greet that rescue dog, I saw Harold in every gesture, and I understood that the best parts of us live on in the people we invest in. This was what investment in the right person looked like. Not checks written out of obligation or guilt, not money extracted through manipulation, but resources given freely to someone who would use them to build something meaningful, something that helped others, something that made the world slightly better than it was before. I settled into a waiting room chair, content to watch the afternoon unfold. The autumn sun slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. The mural I had created caught the light, somewhere in the back. Tate was examining a rescue dog while a little girl laughed. Peace. For the first time since Harold died, I felt something like peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had been lost for simple happiness, but something deeper. Wholeness, purpose, the sense that life could continue, that good things could still be built, that love didn't always end in betrayal. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Sloane's name. Her text was 3 words and a photo. She is here. The image showed a tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect. A newborn, wrapped in a hospital blanket, eyes squeezed shut against the unfamiliar light. A second text followed. We named her Harriet, after Grandpa. I stared at the screen, tears blurring the image. My great-granddaughter, Harold's namesake. A new life, arriving just as I had finally found peace with the old one. Sloane had chosen, after all. 2 weeks after that text, I stood at my bedroom window watching Sloane's car turn into the driveway. The days between had been filled with preparation. I had converted the guest wing into a nursery, assembling a crib Harold and I had kept in storage since Tate's infancy. I had painted the walls a soft yellow, hung curtains that filtered the November light, filled the closet with tiny clothes I couldn't resist buying. Now Sloane was here, and I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry or both. The nursery smell hit me as I passed it on my way downstairs. Fresh paint, new linens, and something else. Cedar. I had lined the closet with cedar, the same wood Harold used in our first apartment. My hands remembered sanding those shelves 40 years ago. Now they were preparing a room for a great-granddaughter named after the man I lost. I opened the front door as Sloane climbed out of the car. She looked exhausted and nervous, dark circles under her eyes, her body still recovering from childbirth. Drew emerged from the passenger side, carrying the infant car seat with exaggerated care. Sloane stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. We stared at each other across the gap, mother's daughter's daughter. 3 generations of complicated love. "Grandma," her voice cracked, "I'm so sorry for everything." I walked down the steps and pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing, and I held her the way I had when she was small, and the world seemed too big to navigate. "I should have said something sooner," she gasped against my shoulder. "At the wedding, at the brunch." I knew what they were planning, and I couldn't. "You warned me when it mattered." "It wasn't enough. I was a coward." "You were afraid." I pulled back to look at her face. "There's a difference." Drew stood awkwardly with the car seat, watching us reconnect. Inside, baby Harriet slept peacefully, unaware of the history swirling around her. We moved inside, settling in the parlor where the afternoon light was gentle. Sloane held Harriet, not yet ready to let her go, and the truth came out in fragments. "Dad threatened me," she said quietly, "before the wedding. He knew I had doubts about how they treated you. He said if I interfered, if I warned you about their plans, he would destroy my career." "How?" "He had fabricated evidence, documents that made it look like I'd been manipulating grades at school. Fake emails, fake complaints from parents." Her voice shook. "He said he'd send them to the school board, to the papers. My teaching license, my reputation, everything I'd worked for." Clayton at Thanksgiving years ago, leaning close to Sloane in the kitchen. I had thought they were bonding. Now I understood he was whispering threats while I basted the turkey. Every family gathering reframed itself. Every smile had been a mask over manipulation. "So you stayed silent," I said, "to protect yourself, to protect your students." "I was a coward," she repeated. "You were a victim." I reached across and took her hand. "Just like me. Just like all of us who didn't see what Clayton was becoming until it was too late." Drew cleared his throat from the doorway. He had been listening. This young man who had married into our fractured family. "For what it's worth," he said, "Sloane wanted to tell you everything. I watched her agonize over it for months. The moment she called to warn you about the lawyer meeting, that took more courage than you know." Sloane looked up at her husband with gratitude. Then she looked down at the baby in her arms. "Would you like to hold her, Grandma?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Sloane rose and placed Harriet in my arms with infinite care. The weight settled against my chest. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, according to the birth announcement. That was all she weighed. But holding her felt like holding the entire future. Her eyes opened, gray-blue, the color newborns start with before their true shade emerges. But the shape of them, the set, and the slight upturn at the corners, that was Harold. "Hello, Harriet," I whispered. "I'm your great-grandmother, and I have so much to tell you about the man you're named after." Her tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb with surprising strength. This grip was Harold's legacy. Not money, not property, not the estate that had nearly torn us apart. This small hand reaching for connection. I wanted her to have something of him. Sloane said softly, "Something good, something true. Mom and Dad took so much, but they couldn't take his name." "No," I agreed, "they couldn't." The afternoon passed in quiet conversation and careful hope. Drew made tea. Sloane nursed Harriet in the nursery I had prepared. We talked about small things, sleep schedules, and pediatrician visits, and the surprising intensity of new parenthood. We did not talk about Clayton and Denise in Florida. We did not talk about the legal battles or the betrayals. There would be time for that later. For now, there was only this: 3 generations of women in a Victorian house beginning to heal. That night, after Sloane and Harriet had settled into the guest wing and the house had gone quiet, I sat alone in Harold's study. In my hands, I held a small silver rattle. Sloane had pressed it into my palm before going to bed. "I found this in Dad's things," she had said, "before they moved to Florida. I think it was Grandpa's." It was Harold's baby rattle, sterling silver, engraved with his initials. I hadn't seen it in decades. Some things, it seemed, did find their way home. I held Harold's silver rattle in my hands as December dawn broke over the garden, and I understood that some things find their way home, even when we've stopped believing they can. Frost covered the garden stones, glittering in the pale morning light. The roses Harold and I had planted together stood bare and patient, waiting for spring. Somewhere in the guest wing, Sloane and baby Harriet slept peacefully, and the house felt fuller than it had in years. I had come outside to think, to breathe, to measure the distance between the woman who had stood at that wedding reception 14 months ago and the one standing here now. The clinic had seen 43 patients last month. Kate's dream was thriving, serving families who might otherwise have gone without care. The investment I had made in him, in his vision, in his character, was returning dividends. Harold would have understood. Not money, but meaning. The estate that had nearly torn us apart was finally serving its purpose. Not as inheritance to be hoarded or extracted, but as resource to be deployed. The clinic, the garden club scholarships I had quietly established, the contributions to the symphony board that bore Harold's name. The fortune Clayton had schemed to control was doing what fortunes should do, building things worth building. I walked the grounds as the frost melted, my breath visible in the cold air. The Victorian estate stood solid behind me, its bones good, its foundation sound. Hello and I had restored this house together over 40 years. Now I was restoring something else, a sense of purpose I had lost somewhere between grief and accommodation. 68 years old, widowed, betrayed, and somehow standing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Everything Clayton had done to diminish me had ultimately set me free. His cruelty had forced my eyes open. His schemes had revealed Harold's protection. His demand for control had triggered the clause that gave me absolute authority over my own life. He was in Florida now, selling insurance for a former colleague, living in a rented condo far from the estate he had coveted. Denise was with him. We exchanged Christmas cards with no warmth and fewer words. Perhaps someday there would be reconciliation. Perhaps not. I had stopped waiting for apologies that might never come. Inside, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and stood before the mirror, the same mirror I had faced on that October morning, wearing the sage dress Harold loved, preparing for Sloane's wedding with hope I didn't know was about to be shattered. I had looked at my reflection then and seen a woman eager for her family's approval, grateful for any scrap of connection. The woman in the mirror now was different. She wore simple clothes and no makeup. Her silver hair was loose. Her eyes held something they hadn't held before. Not anger, not triumph, but clarity. She had stopped asking permission. She had started making choices. She answered only to herself. If you've stayed with me this long, you understand revenge was never the point. Reclamation was. That evening, Tate's car pulled into the driveway at 6 o'clock sharp. Our weekly dinners had become tradition since the birthday confrontation, a touchstone of connection. a reminder that family could be chosen as well as inherited. He came through the door carrying a bottle of wine and a leather-bound book I didn't recognize. "I found this," he said, setting it on the kitchen counter, "in Grandpa's office at the old law firm. Warren was cleaning out files and thought you should have it." I opened the book carefully. Harold's handwriting filled the pages. A journal, dated entries spanning the final year of his life, medical appointments, legal preparations, thoughts he had been too tired to speak aloud. The final entry was dated the night before his heart gave out. I read it aloud, my voice steady despite the tears. "Vivian is the fortune. Everything else is just money. I hope she remembers that when I'm gone. I hope she knows that the estate, the investments, the accounts, they were never the point. She was. She always was." Tate's hand found my shoulder. "He knew," he said quietly. "He knew you would figure it out eventually." He gave me the tools. I closed the journal gently. The codicil. Warren. The truth about the estate. He gave me everything I needed and trusted me to use it when the time came. He chose well when he chose you. We sat by the fireplace after dinner, the journal on the table between us. Sloane had joined us briefly, Harriet drowsing in her arms before retreating upstairs to rest. Drew had made coffee. The house was full of people who had chosen each other. "Family isn't blood," I said, watching the flames. "It's choice. It's showing up. It's staying when things get hard instead of running when the money runs out." Tate nodded. "Grandpa taught me that. He taught us all." I looked at my grandson Harold's eyes, Harold's integrity, Harold's stubborn commitment to doing what was right. His love endures, not through inheritance, through you, through Sloane choosing her own path, through Harriet, who will grow up knowing she was named for someone worth remembering. Outside, December snow began to fall. Inside, the fire crackled and the house settled into peace. Love doesn't end, I realized. It transforms. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it finds its way home. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Looking back on my life story, I see all the moments I should have spoken up. For 3 years after Harold died, I mistook being needed for being loved. I kept writing checks, hoping generosity would earn respect. Don't make my mistake. Don't let the people you love convince you that your worth is measured in what you give them. Some might call this a revenge story, but that was never my intention. This was about reclaiming my life story, not destroying theirs. I believe God puts us through trials not to break us, but to show us our own strength. Hallow saw what I refused to see, and he prepared a way for me to protect myself. The real lesson isn't about punishing those who hurt you. It's about finally loving yourself enough to set boundaries. This wasn't a revenge story born from anger. It was a life story about waking up, about choosing peace over approval, about discovering that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay when staying costs them something. If this story touched your heart today, please leave a comment and tell me, what would you have done differently? Share this with someone who might need to hear these words. And if you want more stories like this, please subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. Remember, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental.
What matters most is the lesson, and I pray it stays with you.